Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore the unused, altered, and unseen content in gaming. In this video, we are wrapping things up for the original Plants vs. Zombies game that started it all, as we take a look at a whole bunch of interesting unused graphics that were left over in one of the beta builds of the game that we discussed in my previous video. If you haven't yet checked out the first two videos I made on this game, I, of course, highly recommend you do for some more context. I'll have them linked for you in the description below. And before we start, a quick shout out to my channel sponsors Control and G Fuel. If you're interested in some delicious meal replacement options or sugar-free energy, they'll both be linked in the description below, and you can use code TETRA at checkout to save a juicy 10 to 30% off. Anyways, with all that said, go collect some sun on that like button. Let's check out some more Plants vs. Zombies Lost Bits. Alright, so like I mentioned, this video will be focusing entirely on a prototype version of Plants vs. Zombies, the version 0.1.1014 build back when it was still called Bloom and Doom, and we'll be focusing on a whole metric ton of graphics found within that prototype that either were updated for the final build or just went completely unused and never really saw the light of day. And there's so many of these unused graphics here that, yeah, there really are enough to warrant their own dedicated video. Now first up, there are a whole bunch of unused graphics in this build that we've already mentioned in previous videos. We'll go through them pretty quick here as you've probably already seen them, but I think they still deserve another mention. First, we got the early leaf background that was once used for the seed selection screen, as was also seen in a prototype build from July 2006 that was shown off at a game development presentation. There's an unused graphic of the propeller that we saw as part of the also unused propeller zombie. There's this early placeholder version of the sunflower, the screenshot that shows off the early version of the slot machine. There's also the caution bar and blammo graphics that were seen in earlier builds as a placeholder for the lawnmower mechanic. And then there's also a pair of unused coin graphics, the first of which is the early silver coin that would feature a brain instead of the dollar sign. Now the second of these unused coins is an early version of the gold coin, where what looks like a sun design was seen on it instead of, once again, the dollar sign. I don't believe this coin is seen in any of the other versions we've went over so far, used or unused, so pretty cool to find this left over here. And lastly for this section, in my previous video I went over several endless survival levels that were cut from the game but were still accessible via the secret Limbo Page menu. And although they are visible on this page in those builds, they all default to the same vase breaker graphic. Turns out, however, that these levels did also have dedicated thumbnail graphics for them that are found left over in this prototype build. So I guess the decision to scrap these might have been done before these graphics could even be implemented. Now next up, I again mentioned this in my previous videos, but for those that didn't know, the developers of Plants vs. Zombies developed another game prior to it in 2001 called Insaniquarium. And there are several references to and leftover graphics from this game, as I've covered in my previous videos, but there are also a few graphics left over from the deluxe version of Insaniquarium in this build that aren't seen in any of the other versions of Plants vs. Zombies that I've covered so far. Anyways, these unused graphics include this notification window, some menu buttons, as well as similar looking blank dialogue buttons. There's graphics for a checked off as well as unchecked checkbox. And lastly, if you aren't sick of button graphics yet, there's also a few more in purple, blue, both normal as well as in a clicked state as we saw with the others. And finally, there's this yellow button also seen in a default as well as clicked on state. Alright friends, now moving on, we can finally check out some unused Plants vs. Zombies graphics that are unique to this build. Well, at least from all of the builds that we have public access to as I make this video. So first up, we got a pretty cool one, as there are several graphics for an animation of a purple explosion aptly and simply titled Nuke. Now if you've ever played this game, you may remember that the Doom Shrooms, when used, explode in a, would you look at that, purple mushroom cloud. So yeah, this was likely designed to be the Doom Shrooms explosion before the more simplistic graphics were chosen and implemented. Next up, we got piles of rocks? Riveting, I know. Now based on the fact that this graphic is as long as one of the lanes during gameplay, it's thought that these rocks would be placed over an entire lane and would probably prevent the planting of plants or shrooms. As such, it's been theorized that this may have been a gimmick used during some stages or minigames, or could have even been part of an early or alternate variant of the Zomboni, as the resulting ice from them also prevents the planting of any units for a while. And while on the topic of rocks, next we have graphics for this unused stone variant of the spikeweed. And here we can also see the stages of degradation that were scrapped for the spikeweed too. Now, based on their similar color scheme and both being related to hard, non-metallic mineral materials, it's believed that this might have been an early version of the Spike Rock upgrade to the Spikeweeds. Now, next up are 3 gold variant upgrades of certain items: a golden phonograph, a bag of fertilizer, as well as shovel, with the shovel graphic notably appearing much less polished than the others. Based on how the golden watering can plant plants in a 3x3 grid compared to the base version single tile, it's theorized that all 3 of these unused golden items would work in a similar manner when upgraded. The gold shovel could have dug up plants in a 3x3 area to more quickly remove them, and then the gold phonograph and bag of fertilizer could have made plants happy and fertilized them respectively, also in that 3x3 grid to save time and likely money as well. Next up, we have this graphic, which appears to be a portion of the fog level. And of course, there's more to it than just that, as this appears to reveal an alternate, likely early version of it, as here the backyard pool's water is at a lower level, and the water's texture itself is also different compared to how it's seen in the versions used. Then next we have a pair of test graphics, the first of which is this test pattern featuring a whole bunch of intersecting lines, as well as the large internal square being colored red. I'm not really sure what exactly this could be testing, but if any of you know, be sure to let us know down in the comments. Then secondly, and again in a square shape, we have test anim, which is seen as a red square outline with internally intersecting blue and green lines. Based on the name, this appears to have been used as a reference for boundaries as well as the horizontal and vertical center lines when animating objects for the game. Next, we have a blank seed upgrade interface that has text on it letting us know exactly what it is. And lastly here, we got this unused graphic of a skull, which based on its color scheme is believed to have been part of the menu graphics, specifically as part of the music and sound volume sliders. Now those are all of the more polished, unused graphics that are left over in the game, but lastly for this video, I want to dedicate a whole section to the more crude, early, and unfinished graphics left over unused in this prototype of Plants vs. Zombies. For starters, we have this really early and basic placeholder version of the background window for the section where you choose which seeds you want to use in a given level. This graphic, and many which we'll take a look at going forward in this video, appear in a very crude Microsoft Paint style like this. Next up, we got a whole bunch of early graphics for miscellaneous items and objects. These include early, but not as early as the ones we went over earlier, versions of the silver and gold coins, an early version of the diamond, early flags, as well as a small zombie head, probably for the progress bar. There's a larger zombie head, as well as horizontal and vertical arms, a pearl of some sort thought to be a cut currency item, and lastly there's also this dead turnip, rest in peace. If you've watched my previous videos, you might remember that turnips were one of the cut plant types that were planned to appear in this game, so I guess based on this graphic existing, they were at least somewhat implemented outside of just concept sketches before ultimately getting scrapped. And it wasn't until this game's sequel where the turnip finally got its debut as the tile turnip. Next up, we have a pair of unused graphics for Crazy Dave, as well as his Twitty Dinky's shop. For the shop, there's this really early and equally crude graphic of the hatchback to Dave's car appearing closed, and then we have this unused graphic of Dave himself where a few differences can be seen. This graphic features different sprites used for Dave's mouth as well as his beard. The pot on his head is slightly different, his shirt is shaded a bit differently too, and although cut off, his ears appear much longer here in this graphic as if he was some sort of elf or something. Now if you thought this door graphic was crudely drawn, you ain't seen nothing yet, as allow me to introduce you to this door. Now that's what I call programmer art. Based on its appearance, it looks like this door might have been drawn as a placeholder for the front door of the building that you defend in the game. Moving on, next up we got this brown tile simply titled Cobblestone, I suppose indicating what this was a placeholder of. Then we have two identical versions of this graphic titled Waveside and Wave Center respectively. In addition to what the names suggest, these appear to show something undulating, and there's really only one thing in the game that has waves like this, and that's the water in the backyard pool. So perhaps this graphic is associated with how the waves are formed in it. Next up, we got numerous early looking graphics for some fallen leaves. Just based on the way these graphics are seen, it appears like they were meant to have been seen on the pathways in the game with an unknown effect. These graphics, coupled with the leaves seen on the early seed selection screen we went over earlier, make it seem possible that there might have been some more autumn or fall related aspects in the game, such as maybe seasonal versions of each level or something. Then, all unused, we have an early graphic for the sun that you collect where it's just seen as a more simple sphere. There are these early graphics for the Zombot's hands, this small speech bubble, as well as these early graphics for the portals which are seen in the Portal Combat minigame. Next up, there are several unused cursors meant for the Zen Garden section of the game. In addition to early placeholder versions of the default and golden watering cans I mentioned earlier, these unused graphics also seemingly reveal bronze and silver upgrades to the can that were cut. Presumably, these would incrementally increase the watering area up to the 3x3 that the golden can offers. Additionally, there are also unused graphics for a standard pointing hand cursor, as well as this green reticle. You only really see a reticle once in this game, and that's when selecting a target for the cob cannon, so perhaps this was an early version of that. And on that note, there's also this unused graphic for the cob cannon's reticle found in the files as well, where it's seen more stretched out to give it more of a three-dimensional look. This doesn't really fit the angle of the path seen in the game, so it makes sense why this was scrapped in favor of the one that is used. Then circling back to the Zen Garden, there's also this set of unused graphics of some early artwork of some sprouts meant to be seen in the garden. And also for the garden, there's this unused black blob graphic that's actually supposed to be an early version of the shadows that are seen in the mushroom garden. Next up, we got early placeholder versions of both the lawnmower and pool cleaner, as well as some early graphics of seed packets where they are seen torn into 3 pieces. It's thought that these graphics might suggest that originally, new plants would be unlocked after collecting 3 pieces of their seed packet instead of just getting them right away after completing their respective stage. This is similar to how stages are completed and new species are unlocked in Insaniquarium after the player buys 3 pieces of an egg. So yeah, this just adds more validity to this theory. Hope you're not tired of the unused graphics yet, as we got a whole bunch more to go. So next, we got several unused graphics for the zombies of the game. We got this sprite of a balloon that seems to be the same one from the early version of the balloon zombie, as well as a graphic of it popping. And then similarly, there's also this early version of the ladder zombie's ladder. Then next, there's also a whole bunch of sprites for many parts of the zombies, including their bodies, heads, as well as arms for several zombie types, including the miner, pole vault, and more. When putting some of these sprites together, their animations can be created where we can see them walking, munching, as well as grimacing, presumably after eating some garlic as is seen in the final version. Interestingly though, this sprite sheet also appears to have some old sprites for the zombies doing the Thriller dance as part of the Michael Jackson themed dancing zombie Easter egg that was scrapped from the game as we went over in my previous videos. And now, last up for this video, we went over the early unused graphics related to the zombies, but now it's time to move on to the plant side of things. First up here, there are several unused graphics showing off an earlier version of the Blover plant. We got its seed pack, idle stance, as well as its spinning and seemingly getting dizzy and stunned, resulting in its eyes spiraling out. I guess this might have been how the plant would expire on the field, which would have been pretty cool to see, at least more interesting than just disappearing as it does in its final form here. Next, there's also some graphics for an early version of the coffee bean, and in this animation it can be seen leafless and, more importantly, winged. I guess maybe they were going for some sort of vague Red Bull gives you wings caffeine relation here, and I guess a leaf just made a lot more sense than a coffee bean having wings for whatever reason. Now earlier we talked a bunch about the cob cannon's early aiming reticles, but there are also some early graphics for the cobs of corn too. First, there's this simple one, and if that ear of corn wasn't crude enough, there's also this set of sprites where we can see the cob going through its trajectory towards its target. Next up, we got an early thought bubble containing some Zeds meant for shroom-type units sleeping if placed during the daytime. There's this early graphic of a purple cloud that's believed to be a placeholder for the Fume Shroom's gas blast. And lastly, there's another sprite sheet, this time showing off a whole bunch of early or unused projectile types. So yeah, in addition to early versions of projectiles normally seen in the game, like the cabbages, stars, peas, and watermelons, there's also a few things that were ultimately cut from the game, like the iceberg lettuce variant, as well as the stinger bees that were an early version of the cactus unit. And furthermore, there are also a few unused projectile types here that we haven't even seen yet, a rock that would break open, as well as a cinched up black bag. Being found flanking the basketballs that the catapult zombies launches, it's theorized that these rocks and bags would have also been launched by the catapult zombies as well. It's honestly pretty crazy how many early and unused graphics there are found left over in this prototype build of Plants vs. Zombies. I don't think I've ever dedicated a whole video to just unused graphics like this before. So yeah, it's awesome that this build was dumped to the public so we can get an awesome glimpse into an even earlier part of Plants vs. Zombies development. Anyways, that'll wrap up this series for the first Plants vs. Zombies on Lost Bits, at least for now. So many of you have been showing that you're very much interested in me covering these games by absolutely demolishing that like button, so yeah, keep crushing it and you can definitely expect more videos from this series on this channel in the future. Till then though, check out some of my other Lost Bits videos and make sure you're subscribed to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by today, and I will see you in a bit.